The state of the film industry is certainly quite perilous right now. And while shock box office flops happen every single year without fail, what about those commercial duds that just about everyone saw coming? From their outrageously uncommercial subject matter to the track records of those involved, or perhaps the sheer fact that nobody asked for them, the following movies all sank like a stone at the box office. I'm Ellie for What Culture, here with 10 recent movie flops everyone saw coming. Number 10, Madam Webb. The easiest predictor of a franchise's future performance is ostensibly its past performance, and so it shocked nobody when the latest entry into Sony's Spider-Man universe flamed out commercially just like its direct predecessor, Morbius. Even though Madam Webb was budgeted relatively sensibly for a superhero blockbuster, costing roughly $100 million, which is less than half your average Marvel Cinematic Universe movie price tag, it still failed to turn even a modest profit, grossing just $100.5 million globally. With tentpole films typically needing to gross roughly 2.5 times their budget to break even, that leaves S.J. Clarkson's critically panned superhero flick firmly in the red to the tune of around $150 million. Given that Morbius managed to gross $167.5 million back in 2022 on an even more svelte $83 million budget, no less, it's an undeniably embarrassing result for Sony's ongoing attempts to build a Spider-Man adjacent cinematic universe. Outside of Venom, which has performed reliably at the box office in its 2 entries to date, the interest just doesn't seem to be there. And except in the quality of the output, the blame can't be laid with audiences at all. Number 9, The Crow. Who couldn't have foreseen that a 15 years in development remake of a movie most fans were quite averse to ever seeing remade might fail to strike a chord with audiences? Lionsgate, apparently, who sunk $50 million into a remake slash reboot slash reimagining slash what have you of Alex Proyer's 1994 cult classic adaptation of James O'Barr's comic book The Crow. The 1994 film was such an of-its-era project, albeit one that's remained fiercely popular with fans for a full 3 decades, that there simply wasn't much interest in seeing it redone. And once the first trailer confirmed most fans' fears that The Crow had been retooled into an overly glossy, grit-devoid, edgy-for-edgy's sake action thriller, there was no saving it. It was just a matter of how catastrophically it would flop. The Bill Skarsgård-led remake ended up grossing a pitiful $23.9 million globally, not even half its production budget, and making it the first of many brutal box office misses for Lionsgate this year. Number 8, Horizon: An American Saga Chapter 1. Passion projects and box office dynamite can often be a tough nut to crack, as evidenced by Kevin Costner's lavish, ambitious 4-part Western project, Horizon: An American Saga. It's clear that Costner and producers were banking on the popularity of his Western series Yellowstone to propel Horizon Chapter 1 to gangbusters box office with its card-carrying boomer demographic. But as it turned out, they mostly just waited for it to hit streaming. Even with its slick, made-for-cinema production values and the sheer scarcity of lavish westerns being produced these days, it wasn't enough to get older audiences out to the cinema, with the $50 million epic scraping just $38.2 million worldwide. It's an especially sour result for Costner, given that he'd already shot the second movie and portions of the third before the first had even been released, and by his own admission, invested $38 million of his own cash getting the first 2 films made. But considering that older audiences have been tricky to lure back to cinemas, and Chapter 1 touted a bladder-bursting 181-minute runtime, it wasn't exactly surprising that the target demographic stayed home and rented it a few weeks later instead. As a silver lining though, Chapter 1 did at least storm the streaming charts on its first week of release, so that's a plus. Number 7, Borderlands. If any film on this list felt truly cursed since its inception, it's surely Borderlands, which lost the battle with fans of the video games the moment that its admittedly star-studded cast was announced. Fans were bemused by hiring the short-statured Kevin Hart to play the burly Roland and casting a 50-something Cate Blanchett as Lilith, a character who is in her early 20s in the first game. The stew was further tainted by its high-profile strained production. It wrapped shooting in June 2021, but the first trailer didn't drop until February 2024. In the interim, reports of poor test screenings, reshoots conducted by a different director, Deadpool's Tim Miller subbing in for original director Eli Roth, and writer Craig Mazin not so quietly departing the project, generated a tough-to-shake stink. Combine all of this with a $120 million budget, nothing burger set of trailers, the clear disinterest from both the fanbase and regular moviegoers, and reviews being held back until the day before release, and the writing was firmly on the wall. Borderlands admittedly grossed just $33 million globally, making it one of the biggest flop video game adaptations of all time, an especially wince-inducing outcome in an era where Hollywood was finally starting to take the medium seriously. Number 6. Argyle. On paper, Argyle actually should have had a ton of box office potential. What with its stupendously stacked cast and the pedigree of Kingsman director Matthew Vaughn. That is, except that Vaughn's filmmaking stock tumbled considerably after the mediocre reception to both Kingsman's sequel, The Golden Circle, and prequel, The King's Man. And the marketing for this spy caper, which touted the film as From the Twisted Mind of Matthew Vaughn, ended up leaving audiences more irritated than excited. Universal and Apple certainly tried to make fetch happen though, given that they spent many months spamming Argyle's trailer across every delivery system imaginable, to the point that folks legitimately started complaining about it. All the same, the eye-watering $200 million budget handicapped this one right out of the gate, ensuring it needed to gross roughly $500 million to be a theatrical success. And not even rumours of Taylor Swift's involvement with the script could do much to move the needle, as amid wildly mixed reviews, Argyle reaped just $96.2 million. Though the blow will be cushioned somewhat by the involvement of Apple, who are clearly focused more on streaming than theatrical exhibition, that's still a hellish result for an accessible genre film with one of the best casts of the entire year. But it's also one that many saw coming months ahead of time. Number 5. Transformers 1. Once upon a time, the Transformers franchise was an unsinkable box office juggernaut, with Michael Bay's first 4 live-action films grossing over $3.7 billion combined. But there's no denying that mainstream interest in Transformers movies has been on the downslide for years now, with Transformers The Last Knight, Bumblebee, and Transformers Rise of the Beasts making decidedly more modest returns on their budgets. And so even with animation being an easy hit for younger audiences, it was easy to question the prospects of Transformers 1, a standalone animated origin story with a production budget reportedly anywhere between $75 million and $147 million. Now, even if we charitably accept the lower figure as correct, its current box office performance sees it falling far short of the approximate break-even number of $187.5 million. And much of the blame can be pointed towards the film's marketing, as its woeful first trailer sadly killed much mainstream interest. Despite being well received by critics and those audiences who did venture out to see it, the PR damage had been irreversibly done. For all the bad that can be said about the Bayverse era of Transformers films, they certainly put a ton of butts in seats, and it wasn't much of a shock that this more niche, source-faithful take failed to catch on with casual viewers. Number 4. Fly Me to the Moon. Has any movie this year been more obviously sent out to die than Fly Me to the Moon? You couldn't be blamed for even failing to realise that this romantic dramedy starring 2 of the most recognisable stars on the planet, Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum, was quietly dropped into cinemas by Columbia and Apple back in July. The marketing spend was conservative to say the least, perhaps because someone retroactively appreciated that a $100 million rom-com set against the Apollo 11 mission was a bolder-than-bold gamble, per both the niche subject matter and rom-com's lack of theatrical presence in the streaming era. Lo and behold, Fly Me to the Moon tanked commercially, netting just $42.1 million at the box office. For even though it landed an impressive A- cinema score, the film's visibility and leave the house appeal just wasn't there at all. Number 3. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Though the trailers for Guy Ritchie's The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare made it look like a solidly fun joint, like most of the filmmaker's recent films, it received a suspiciously soft marketing push, enough that you could have easily glossed over its theatrical bow altogether. Given that Ritchie's 2 prior films, Operation Fortune, Ruse de Guerre, and The Covenant, were quietly dumped in US cinemas before being released internationally on streaming, it was hardly a surprise to see his latest suffer a similar fate. With a hefty $60 million budget, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare made back just $27.3 million around the world, making it a theatrical dud any way you spin it. Evidently, streaming deals likely saved it from total failure, as with his prior films. But given Ritchie's name recognition globally, it's baffling that his sensibly budgeted genre films are basically being drop-kicked into US cinemas without much fanfare, while international audiences have little opportunity to watch his films on the big screen at all. Number 2. Megalopolis. For all of the floppy obviousness of the other films on this list, not one of them matches Megalopolis in terms of sheer inevitability. Francis Ford Coppola's epic sci-fi drama, a passion project that he spent almost 50 years developing, proved unwieldy and box office averse enough that the conventional studio system wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. And so Coppola took the nuclear option, selling off a chunk of his ultra-lucrative wine business to fund the $120 million production himself. A move that's been called both financially irresponsible and the most baller thing ever done by an auteur. Mind you, both of these things can be true. All the same, the fact that Coppola had to take out his own checkbook made it painfully clear that Megalopolis was never making its money back, a fact solidified by anyone who'd taken a peek at the script draft circulated online for years. At least Coppola likely had realistic expectations for the project, which would have needed to gross around $300 million globally to be deemed a financial success. All the same, even he probably expected it to gross more than the $10.8 million it currently is sitting at after weeks on release. That's a brutal rejection of the film by all but the most ardent cinephiles, though hardly a surprise to anyone who's actually seen it. A chaotic, tonally uneven, at times baffling mess. Number 1. Harold and the Purple Crayon. It's incredibly easy to underestimate the box office potential of a film based on a popular children's book. But all the same, Sony made it clear they didn't have any faith in this thing pre-release. So then why would audiences? An adaptation of Crockett Johnson's hit 1955 picture book of the same name, Harold and the Purple Crayon is a film that had fans of the book and general viewers doubtful from the jump. Between the trailers failing to make the most of the central concept, many feeling that it would have been better served by animation rather than live action, and Zachary Levi's declining popularity post-Shazam, it was clear as day this thing was going to flounder in cinemas. And that it did. For even with a modest $40 million budget, its final take was a paltry $29.2 million, seemingly solidifying Levi's demise as a leading man.